In the late 1970s, there was a very popular book called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. It was very popular, probably one of the first pop psychology types books on finding happiness and journeying to be a fulfilled life and finding out what our true purpose is. He also wrote another book a few years later called The People of the Lie. It was not as popular because it spoke about evil, because it spoke about how people tell themselves a lie that evil is okay, that evil can be perpetuated because maybe it doesn't exist, because I can do what I want and I'm not accountable to anybody because everybody's doing it. So it kind of rationalizes poor decisions because we look around at a culture that says, well, it's okay. It normalizes bad behavior. Or even that maybe we tell ourselves a lie that, well, God won't mind. If I go ahead and make poor decisions, is the Lord going to mind? Well, maybe he's not watching me today. It's what we call denial. It's denial of God and God's presence. It's also what we call denial of the gift of a conscience. The gift of a conscience which God gives each one of us. We are not robots. And we can create robots and we can have incredible technology in our world. And I'm sure there's even more fascinating and incredible things to come in that particular area and field to make life easier. But something that technology and robots do not have is a conscience. That's something that people are given, that the human person is given as the crown jewel of all of God's creation. We are given the gift of a conscience to know the difference between right and wrong. Today, in our gospel reading, we hear a very familiar parable from Luke chapter 15. It's in the lost and found department of Luke's gospel, because it speaks just before this of the coin that was lost and the woman that went out to find it would do whatever she could to find it. It speaks about the lost sheep and how that the shepherd would go off and leave the 99 to find the one lost. And we have the lost son. And that the lost son was valuable to the father. But you see, the lost son was lost. He was lost because of the fact that he denied responsibility for being a part of that family. He made a poor decision, and it sounded really good to him. He said yes to a lie. And that was the lie that probably the devil had put into him and said, leave your family, get your inheritance. Dad'll give it to you. Take every last penny of it and go off on your own. Life is going to be so much better. You can do whatever you want. No more work. There's not going to be anyone to answer to. No older brother. No farm hands there to have to keep busy during the day. No father to have to remind you of where you have come from. And that son listened to that. And he said, I'm going to go ask Dad, and I'm going to trust he's going to give me everything. And I would say that was a pretty incredible father, that he said, sure, you go ahead and you go off on your own. And look at what happened to that son. At some point, he realized he had made a terrible mistake. Because you see, when he walked away from his father, he was basically saying to his father, you are dead. You do not exist any longer. And I'm going to live my life as though I never knew you. Or maybe I knew you, but I don't know you now. You are not relevant in my life. Sadly, this is what happens when sin enters into our hearts and we turn our backs on God and we say, God is dead. There's no God. I don't have to answer to him. The son, he did that when he walked away. I'm not answering to my father anymore. Secondly, the son realized when he was in the slop with the pigs that that wasn't really a very good place to be. And that's what sin does. Sin puts us into darkness, puts us into a slop with pigs, into a place where nothing of material value can satisfy us. And we realize we have an unfulfilled thirst for a God who exists. And in the midst of that slop of that darkness, of that evil, is where conversion happened for the son. Because suddenly he said, wow, this is awful. It doesn't matter what earthly pleasures I have fulfilled. Look at where I am. That's what sin does. It puts us in a horrible place, in a place where we can be surrounded by all things that may look good or have looked good at one time, or may look good for pigs, but it doesn't look good for human beings. And so we need to be able to say, I'm going to make a choice, and that's what the son realized. I am accountable. I do have a history. I have relationship with people who are far beyond me and who are going to help me be a better person. And that took a lot of humility. It took a lot of courage. It took a lot of faith. It took a lot of hope for him to go back to the Father. And that's exactly what he did. He went back, and thank God that the Father went running after him. We so often call this the parable of the prodigal son. It probably should be called the parable of the running father, because the father goes running out to the son. He sees him. The son didn't even have to say anything. But I'm sure in their further conversations that once the fattened calf was eaten and the party had ended, I'm sure there was some pretty serious conversation in that household. I think we can realize that and probably take good confidence that he was held accountable. And you see, this is what happens to ourselves, especially in the current society, culture. It's very easy to blame that, but we are to blame. We are to blame when we sin. We are to blame when we do not stand up for what is right. We as people are to blame when we fall into the lie that evil might be good. And you know, there's small things that we do on a daily basis. Maybe we're at work and we fall into the lie of there's a pencil on the desk and we're about to leave for the day, and you say, well, you know, I could use a new pencil at home. And my employer, he's kind of cheap. He's miserly. He doesn't even give me a cost of living increase. So I'm going to take it. I deserve it. That's like kind of a small little lie. Maybe it's, well, I gave up bread for Lent. But if I go into the pantry and maybe there's some nice Hawaiian dinner rolls there and they look really, really good, and you say, well, nobody's watching, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. That's a lie. It's convincing ourselves, oh, I'm going to do this. Maybe it happens to do when there's sin, when we say, well, this Sunday we're traveling. You know, we're leaving for a cruise out of Port Canaveral at 5 o'clock. And I have to be there at noon because I want to start gorging myself at the buffet as soon as possible. So I'm not going to go to church this morning because we're traveling. Oh, and I heard that if you're traveling, you don't have to go to church. No, there's more responsibility, folks, because you can even be enriched by going to a totally different church and a totally different environment. Maybe, so you say that day, I'm not going to church. Well, you know what? It's sinful. That nowhere along the line have we said that there's not still an obligation to come to church. Y'all are here. I'm preaching to the choir. But next weekend, I don't know if you're going to be here or not. I assume that you will be, but you know, you might have that cruise to go on, or you might have something better to do on that particular Sunday. And what voice are you going to listen to? Maybe some of the sinfulness that comes up is when we're sitting at a computer. And you know, you think, well, the computer, I can type whatever I want into Google and find out whatever I want about whoever I want, or go to places that I know Grandma wouldn't want me to go looking at because of the fact that, well, nobody's watching. So we make bad decisions. And it looks good at the moment, but then there's guilt. Then there's, oh, maybe I shouldn't have spent the last 3 hours shopping online and getting my credit card out, because eventually, guess what? The bill is going to come and reality is going to set in. And you may not have that money to spend. Again, using modern technology, it's a wonderful thing. But very often today, people write things in a text message that they would never say to a person. And they'll write something in a text message. Guess what? You never know where it's going. And you don't think very much about saying it because it's a machine. A phone means nothing. It has no conscience. But somewhere along the line, someone's going to read that who does have a conscience, and it could be hurtful. But our filter is no longer there. You see, maybe it felt good for you to get out your frustrations on that phone. But guess what? Eventually there's ramifications. There's accountability. Maybe as a parent, in some way, shape, or form, comes to the children, at some point you make a decision to go ballistic on them and to lose patience. But guess what? That's probably not the right direction to go. There may have been a better way to exhibit and to nurture that relationship. Those are just a few examples of sinfulness. And I think this scripture comes up to us in Lent because this is a time of conversion. These weeks are weeks for us to get ready for the most beautiful celebration of the year, for Easter, to rise above, to be able to walk away from darkness, sin, evil, and to relish in God's glory. So as we're at this halfway point in Lent, it might be a good chance to say, what voice are you listening to? When it comes to the voice of the devil saying, oh, this looks really good, I think you should do this. Are we strong enough, courageous enough, and hope-filled enough to just say, no, the voice I listen to is that of my Heavenly Father. The Father who comes running after us. The Father who loves us so incredibly that nothing else will satisfy us except God's love. The Father who gave us a conscience, who gave us the gift of making decisions. I often think of parents, and obviously I've not had to raise a child, but I think of parents when we want to give our children something, we wonder what's the best gift we can give to our child. I assure you, it's not a hefty inheritance. The best gift to give a child is not a house or a car. Even an education is wonderful, and it's so important. But the best gift that we can give to a child or grandchild is a conscience. It is that ability to say yes and no, to know the difference between right and wrong, to know the difference between lies of the devil and the goodness of our God. What voice are you listening to this Lent? And can you have the courage to say yes to that call to reconcile with Him, to be humble enough to go back to the Father, so that you can anticipate the beauty of all that He has in store for you this Easter, an inheritance that will last forever.